I want to start with a brief mental exercise, but it won't be too taxing. I want you to take a minute, close your eyes for a second if it'll help you, and just call to your mind an image, a picture of Moshe, of Moses. Like just bring up, when you think of Moses, what do you think about? And as you sit in that image, take note of what Moses is holding in Moses's hands. And just put into the chat, in your image of Moses, what's Moses holding? It's a brief poll. So just type into the chat what Moses is holding. Here we go. Staff, 10 Commandments. Walking staff. Oh, an iPad tablet. I like that, Michael. It's a little anachronism, but it's good. Burning bush. Oh, another iPad. All right. The rod, the staff. Ooh, piece of coal. Nice. Prague. Oh, we got a whole bunch of lovely things coming in. A stone. Ooh, Moses at the burning bush. So we're getting lots of megaphone. That's good. I'm enjoying seeing what's coming in, and I don't want to make anyone self-conscious, but Heidi Lasser, you're on my screen, and your reaction to everyone's. I love the way you're appreciating the humorous hats. You're adding to your smile is infectious. So there you go. There are 3 tablets and the one he dropped. There we go. Awesome. So we pulled up a lot of common images. Oh, Beryl says a sandwich. It's true. Moses, like later when we get to Yitro, we'll talk about Moses and self-care. But I always think about Moses like doesn't have time to eat his lunch. Anyways, a quick tally in my head, totally not scientific, and I should have done this in a poll so we could get actual results on a graph. But while we saw lots of images, it seemed like there were a variety of things tied for 3rd place. 10 Commandments was in 2nd place, or the tablets, and Moses' staff was 1st. And I don't think that's an accident. The image of Moses with his staff is a prominent one. Actually, when I told my wife I was teaching about Moses and his staff this morning, she said, oh, like all the people on Moses' team who helped him, guide the Israelites through the desert. I was like, no, not his leadership team. Not that kind of staff, but his actual, mateh in Hebrew, the rod. And it might be, I'm going to share my screen in a second. It might be, here we go, depending on what we're gonna date ourselves, although no one has to. Hang on, I just have to move. Nope, I'm trying to start my slideshow. Sorry. Give me just a second. Oh, here we go. There we go. It might be that the image you called up was similar to this one from the 10 Commandments. Some of us, when we picture Moshe very much so, as Charlton Heston. He's an iconic Moshe. It's also possible, if you come from a different generation, that you picture Moshe from the Prince of Egypt, right? But many of the images, if you Google like images of Moses in movies, while there are, I didn't see any with iPads. But that kind of tablet. Oh, I just got the pun. The iPad tablet. It's like the tablets of the 10 Commandments. You'll see pictures of Moses with the 10 Commandments, but you'll also see a lot of pictures in all sorts of different places and spaces and poses of Moshe holding Moshe's staff, which we're going to take a deep dive into today. So this week's Parashat is Vaera, and there's an appearance of the staff, which we're going to look at, and it shows up in some of the opening verses. Shemot chapter 7, verses 8 to 12. Right? God says to Moses and Aaron, when Pharaoh speaks to you and says, produce your marvel, you shall say to Aaron, take your rod and cast it down before Pharaoh, and it shall turn into a serpent. And so Moses and Aaron came before Pharaoh and did just as the Lord had commanded. Aaron cast down his rod in the presence of Pharaoh and his courtiers, and it turned into a serpent. And then Pharaoh, for his part, summoned the wise men and the sorcerers and the Egyptian musicians in turn, and did the same with their spells. Each cast down their rod and they turned into serpents, but Aaron's rod swallowed their rods. So I appreciate that these verses, when it talks about the rod, the staff, is talking about Aaron's rod, not Moses' rod. We're going to come back to that in a second. But we see here in our Parsha, as Moses and Aaron are trying to make the case before Pharaoh, they make use of the staff and the marvels that it produces, its ability to turn into serpents, and then it's the ability of that serpent to swallow the serpents of the Egyptian sorcerers. Seems to be part of the way in which they're making the case to Pharaoh is to use produce marvels the way Pharaoh's magicians do. Right? There's a functional purpose here. If we're going to convince Pharaoh to let our people go because God says to do that, we're going to use Pharaoh's language to show that God is more powerful than him, or God's marvels are more powerful than Pharaoh's magicians' marvels. The staff is used to help make the case to Pharaoh and his court. So that's point number one. If we jump back to last week's Parsha, we see Moses in the desert at the burning bush, getting instructions from God to use the staff also to make the case, but this time, or that time, not in Pharaoh's court, but to the Israelites. Right? God says, go to the Israelites and say, I'm going to take them out of Egypt. And Moses speaks up and says, what if they don't believe me and do not listen? But say, the Lord did not appear to you, right? Moses, we know, has some hesitancy about going back to Egypt and telling the people he's going to lead them out. God's going to lead them out. He voiced that last week, and God responds, what's that in your hand? And Moses replies, a rod. And God says, cast it on the ground, and cast it on the ground, and it becomes a snake. And Moses recoiled from it. And then God says to Moses, put your hand out and grasp it by the tail. And Moses does that, and it turns back into a rod. And what's the purpose of all this? That they, the people, will believe that the Lord, their God of their fathers and God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, did appear unto you. So just like the marvels of the staff are used to make the case to convince the Egyptians that God is real and has, it's serious business here, the staff is also used to make the case for the Israelites as well. There's another time, we're going to get to it in a few weeks, where the staff shows up in Shemot 17:19, before the Israelites go to battle with Amalek. We're out of Egypt after this. There's a lot of plot between now and then. But Moses says to Joshua before this battle, pick some men for us and go out to do battle with Amalek, right? To get an army together. We're going to fight the Amalek people. And tomorrow I will station myself on top of the hill with the staff of God in my hand. Here's the staff a third time, but this time it's not the staff of Aaron or the staff of Moses, it's the staff of God. But Shemot Rabbah, the Rabbinic Midrashic collection, says about this, right? About the quote, with the staff of God in my hand, the Midrash says this: when Aaron worked miracles with it, it was called by his name. That's our Parsha. When Moses, worked miracles with it, it was called by my name. That's at the burning bush and to the Israelite people. And when God worked miracles here in Shemot 17, it was called by God's name. A rabbinic tradition seems to say the staff in each of these incidents is the same staff. And sometimes Moses is holding it, sometimes Aaron is holding it, and sometimes they're the agents of the marvels, and sometimes God is. But while the name changes, the staff is the same staff. That's the start of a journey about how the rabbis think about the staff. I want to take us through a few rabbinic imaginings about the staff and where it comes from. And then after we do that, we're going to take a look at a counter tradition that maybe thinks a little bit differently about it. Here we go. Nope, I have to move some of my Zoom windows, which are on the way of the words here. I went with an old cut and paste, or I guess photograph and paste here, because the Sefaria translations of this Mishnah from Pirkei Avot weren't as clear. The rabbis when thinking about this staff, and not only this staff, had some difficulty, which is I think the rabbis looked out in the world and said, the world seems to follow its own path, and there seem to be rules of nature that govern it. And it made them uncomfortable with miraculous moments from the Bible because they didn't see those same miraculous moments in their own world. And as a result, they said there were 10 things that were created at dusk on the eve of the first Shabbat, and these are they. They list 10 things that show up mostly in the Bible that in the rabbinic mind, or at least the mind of this Mishnah, God created these things during creation while the world was being formed, so that when they were needed in the future to be part of some story, they would already be there. It's a take that says God's miracles are built into the fabric as the universe, as opposed to examples of divine intervention that causes the rules of nature. And you can see here, I hesitated whether or not to put this text forward because it could bring us aside that there's so many different things and so many different stories. But it includes the mouth of the earth that swallows up Korach. We're half a year away from that story. The talking donkey of Balaam, the rainbow of Noah after the flood, the manna that falls from the sky in the desert, the staff of Moses, etc., etc., etc. Right, even down to, if you see later, right, the ram that Abraham found in the bushes to sacrifice in place of Isaac. It wasn't happenstance. They say that the ram was there when needed. God placed it there at creation, so it would be there for us later. And one of the things is Moses' staff. And in the rabbinic imagination, the notion is not that this staff that had the ability to work marvels, to turn into a serpent at Moses or Aaron's command and revert back. And then also later, I didn't bring you these quotes from the Torah, but the staff triggers a number of the plagues. It's not explicit in the text, but it appears that the staff triggers the parting of the Red Sea before the Israelite crosses. And we know the staff helps draw water from a rock in stories later as well. But this was not something that was like a spontaneous miracle. This was an item created during the week of creation that had these special abilities. And not only that, the rabbis continue and suggest they trace, I guess they go from this Mishnah, which says, like, how do we have all these things that work miracles? Their next question is, how did this staff get from creation into Moses' hands when he needed it? And Pirkei to Rabbi Eliezer sort of answers that question. So Rabbi Levi says in this Midrash, the rod which was created in the twilight was delivered to the first man out of the Garden of Eden. So God created this staff, the rod, right on the eve of the first Shabbat ever. And when Adam and Eve left the Garden of Eden, God gave the staff to them, and it was put in human possession. It was put into human possession. And Adam passed it on to Enoch, and Enoch handed it to Methuselah, and Methuselah to Noah, and Noah to Shem, and Shem passed it on to Abraham, and Abraham to Isaac, and Isaac to Jacob. And Jacob brought it down to Egypt and passed it on to Joseph. And when Joseph died, they pillaged his household goods and it was placed in the palace of Pharaoh. So there's sort of, to me, this resonates also with a different Pirkei Avot about the Torah being passed down through generations of biblical and then rabbinic leaders. But this says, right, this rod God gave to Adam, and it was passed down through the major biblical characters through the book of Genesis, ended up going down to Egypt with Jacob and given to Joseph. And it sat in Joseph's house until he died, which right at the beginning of Shemot. And when Joseph died, the valuables that he had were taken by Pharaoh and placed in the palace. And then what happens? Rabbi Levi continues. Jethro, Yitro, Moses' father-in-law, who we met last week, was one of the magicians of Egypt. He saw the rod and the letters that were upon it, and he desired in his heart to have it. And he took it and brought it and planted it in the midst of the garden of his house, and no one was able to approach it. So Jethro sees this in Pharaoh's palace, and he says, "Ooh, that's pretty cool. I want it." And he takes it, and he plants it in the garden, and no one can approach it anymore. Some scholars of midrash and ancient folklore like draw a parallel here, perhaps between this midrash and the story of Arthur and the sword and the rock, that no one could approach it, right? And waiting to see who would be able to remove the staff from the ground, just like it wasn't, that's how we knew Arthur would be the next king, because he sword up from the rock. Different legend, different time, but some folklorists see a connection between the two. When Moses came to his house, meaning Jethro's house, he went to the garden and saw the rod and read the letters which were upon it. And he put forth his hand and took it. And Jethro watched Moses and said, "This one in the future will redeem Israel from Egypt." Therefore, he gave him Zipporah, his daughter, to wife. So Moses comes to Jethro's house, sees this rod. He's somehow attracted to it. He too wants to have it. He successfully takes it from the ground. And that's what endears him to Jethro and encourages or pushes Jethro to decide that their family should merge and Moses should marry in. And that's how Moses got the sword. So just like the first midrash, it was important them to say, not the sword, the staff. The first midrash is about, well, these magical things that are on the earth aren't exceptions to nature. They're part of the fabric of the universe and God's design. And here we see, not only that, we can trace this staff from the Garden of Eden to Egypt, to Pharaoh's house, to Jethro's house, to Moses, and it wasn't happenstance. He got this. And for the rabbis, this puts it all in order. Part of what God anticipated in creating the world is we would need this staff created. God creates it during creation and sits and waits. And how is it that Moses happened to have it? Well, it got passed down through the patriarchs and through Pharaoh's house to Jethro, and then Moses takes it on. It's a wonderful telling of the story and a wonderful accounting of this special artifact and the life that it lived and how it got to be where it is. But I guess if you would have asked me when I was younger, the first time I read these opening chapters in Shemot, my initial read was always not that this rod was at all special, but what made it special was it was just an ordinary staff. What the miracle of the staff was that Moses just had his shepherd's crook, and it becomes this tool. And that sort of read we find in a Dvar Torah about this parsha from Rabbi Ismar Shorsh, my former teacher and I guess my always teacher, and the former chancellor of the Jewish Theological Seminary. He brings a critique about the Midrashim that we looked at today and says, where the Mishnah in Pirkei Avot that we looked at errs is in attributing the extraordinary status to the staff. According to the narrative in the Torah, the staff is nothing more than an ordinary shepherd's staff. It was the staff that Moses, tending the flock of his father-in-law Jethro, bore in his hand when he happened to alight on the burning bush. It could not have been more nondescript and unexceptional, but that's precisely the point. The staff harbored no inherent potency. At work was solely God's will, which chose to transform a crude instrument into a titanic power. The spontaneity of the act manifested God's omnipotence. What Rabbi Shor says is contra to what the rabbi said. The power of the staff is not in that God knew we would need it and imbued it with special attributes and put it into the world so it would be there on demand when its time had come. But the power of the staff is it shows God's supreme power, which is both why Moses takes the staff and its marvels to the Israelites and to Pharaoh's court, to demonstrate to the human beings who are both have their reasons to be skeptical that God is a powerful presence in the world. And what the Torah wants to say is the miracle of the staff is, in fact, that it was the transformation of an everyday thing into something sacred. God entering it was the fact that God entered the world and transformed something from what it was on a regular everyday basis and made it something special. And that's the power of this story. And what I love about this teaching is it syncs with my initial read of the story that stayed with me from when I was a young boy. And I also like the way in which Rabbi Shor strongly comes out and is able to say where the Mishnah errs and attributed, where the Mishnah errs, that part of this last paragraph here that he brings is to be able to say, while we take the rabbinic tradition seriously, and it could teach us a lot, both about the Torah and our tradition and what the rabbis in their time thought about what all of it meant, we also have voice. And when we see a different read, we can call it out in our own way and say that, yeah, it's a nice midrash. It's nice to account for the staff the way that they did, but maybe that's more about what the rabbis thought than what the Torah thought. And that this reading might be a better one than the rabbinic one. And it might be the one that we want to hold on to as we read the Parsha this week and encounter the staff in again and again in the weeks to come. So that's what I have to share this week. I see while I was sharing my screen, the chat was a little active. I know for me, while I'm sharing the material, it's harder for me to follow the chat. Mara, did you happen to notice any questions or anyone we can point to give voice to their comments? I'm sorry, we didn't coordinate this before, so I'm sorry.
Oh, no worries. I think a lot of the questions you began to address as you continued. But if anyone wants to raise their hand, their physical hand, I see Esther has her hand raised, so I'll call on her first. If anyone else wants to ask a quick question, they're welcome to put it in the chat or raise their hand. We can't hear
Esther,
you.
we can't hear you just yet. I see you're talking.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah.
How are you? It's nice to see you.
Fine, thank you. To reinforce what you said about the Mate having the power of God is the reason why God got angry at Moses when he hit the rock rather than spoke to the rock. So that the people who see God's power, not in the staff, but God's power as is.
Nice. Right. You can follow this line through the staff, right? The staff is an artifact that cycles back. It's one of those symbols we'll see again and again and again, and to try to draw the through lines like you just did is important to do. So keep watching for when the staff appears and how Moses used it, and see what that means about how you connect it all together. Thank you.
We'll go to Tanya and then Michael.
All right. Hi, Tanya.
Hi. Sir, someone by the name of Steve originally asked this question, but I also had it. Is there a relationship between the staff and?
I think we froze.
Yeah, Tanya, you froze on.
I think in the chat there was a question about the staff being connected to the snake in the Garden of Eden.
Oh, Steve brought the question back. The staff and the snake in the Garden of Eden.
Oh, apologies.
Yeah. There's a connection between the staff and snakes and those images, in that, right, that the miracles of this staff in this moment turn the staff into a snake. There's also there's the moment later where Moses, well, he creates a bronze staff with the snake on it to send some snakes away, that people are being attacked by snakes, which becomes the symbol of, I think, the American Medical Association. I I believe there's a collection, a smattering of midrashim that think about, the connection, that take those images of staff and snake and put them together. I'd have to do some research to go back and find those midrashim to be able to give more specifics to Steve and Tanya. But if you go to Sefaria and you search for snake and staff, I bet you could find those too. So short answer, yes, with apologies that I don't have those at my fingertips. But I would say, Steve and Tanya, if we can't find a good rabbinic connection, there's material there. You can write your own midrashim about that as well. All right, Michael, you were next.
Yes, the differences between the two midrashic kind of views of the staff, whether it had to be created before creation or with creation, is that because the rabbis thought that God can't intercede against the rules of nature? I mean, he had to set up a rule like before creation to be able to do it, and can't just go back and say, hey, make this rod into a snake, because it seems very important for the later interpretation that it was an ordinary staff and God could just do it at that moment, whereas the other rabbis said, no, this rule had to be created before creation.
Right. So, Michael, that's a great point, and you're drawing a great contrast between these two theological approaches. It's a big question, not just within Judaism, but other faiths as well. Can God intervene in the world? Is there divine intervention? Can God pause the rules of nature? And it's hard to answer that with a statement that says the rabbis think this and be definitive about it. There is a strong voice in the Talmudic tradition, the rabbis of the period of the Talmud and the Midrash, pushing against divine intervention.
So what about Shemesh Begivon Dom?
Oh, I just heard a voice somewhere.
Yeah, I said, what about Shemesh Begivon Dom?
Right, there are a number of instances in the biblical record where there are miracles that intervene, and there's a push and pull in our tradition between moments when the interpretation says God can intervene, and there are moments when it says God can't. Some are easier to resolve and some are harder to resolve. But Michael, what you named is right. There is that tension where Rabbi Shorsh in his interpretation says, right, God intervening to imbue a regular object with special powers is what this story is about. And the earlier rabbinic midrashim we saw said, right, that's not possible. Some of it depends upon how we read the text, right? If you read the Bible and you want it to reflect how you understand that the world works, you might be pulled in the earlier rabbinic tradition, which is to say, we don't see God intervening and suspending nature, and we want to read that back into all of our sources. Or, like I think the way Rabbi Shorsh reads the text, which is similar to my own, I'm okay with inconsistencies between how the Bible reads the world and how I do. Meaning, I appreciate that the biblical text allows for miracles, even though I believe that miracles don't happen. And I can suspend my belief of miracles as I read and try to interpret the biblical story, and to say, well, the Bible believes in miracles, and let's try to think about what the impact of that belief is on the story. So those are some of my thoughts.
Okay.
Response to that. So thanks, Michael.
Thank
you. All right, we have Steve and then Joel. Steve, you want to unmute and join us?
Yeah. Can you hear me? Yeah. So I just, I put it in chat, but it could very well be, without suspending belief, that Moses had a bigger snake. There are like 10 species of snakes in Egypt or in Africa. And it could be that Pharaoh just had a smaller version, and Moses had a much larger, deadlier snake that can attack and eat a smaller snake, which is what snakes do. So I just wanted to offer that up. But I did have a question, though, in terms of miracles, and it's about Moses and Aaron. So for whatever reasons, God did not cure Moses' speech impediment. I also realized that Aaron was a slave. Moses grew up royalty. So maybe it was more effective to have Aaron there as a spokesperson because he lived that experience. Or maybe it's good cop, bad cop or something, two is stronger than one. But I've often wondered, again, if Moses was going to be the one, why didn't God cure him of the impediment, give him the strength to do so? But I think there's something about the dynamic about how they grew up and the differences between the two.
All right, Steve, there's a lot in what you said, right? If the turning your staff into a snake trick is, right, a sleight of hand, meaning if it's magic the way we have magicians today who are really illusionists, right? It might be that Moses and Aaron had a bigger snake. So when they made the staff go away and the snakes show up, they had a bigger snake and it swallowed the other snakes and nothing miraculous happened. It just, right, their special effects department was better than Pharaoh's. That's a read of that story that says, hey, there's no, right, the staff to snake and back was not a miraculous thing. It was just a trick, but Moses and Aaron were better at it. And that's why they won the battle there. That's a possible read of this story too. I like the questions you're raising about what's Moses's role, what's Aaron's role. Right, if God's going to intervene, why didn't God cure Moses' speech impairment to let him be the mouthpiece? What's the benefit of have the two of them be there? I think it's at this point, as in our study of the Torah, where we are in the year, those are great questions to leave open, because they'll play out in the story. What's Moses' role? What's Aaron's role? Why do they have different roles? Why isn't it just Moses? How does that develop over time? What does it look like as we move through the narrative? Do the roles shift? When is Aaron's place present? When is Aaron's place absent? It's a great question. I know I'll just say that the partnership that seems to be that they come together now doesn't seem to last explicitly in the text as we go forward. Although some interpreters say, no, it was a partnership. It's just not emphasized along the way. But I think those are really astute questions to ask about these two leaders of the people. And we know, right? We have the 5 books of Moses, not the 5 books of Moses and Aaron, right? Moses is the prophet who there are no other prophets like him, not Aaron. So there's a way in which Moses ascends and Aaron, moves to the sideline over time. And why that is and what you think about it, and maybe do you want a different read of the text? Those are all good questions. So Steve, thanks for that. All right, Joel.
Okay, do you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, I believe there's all miracles, and even this group.
Joel, we could hear you and we just lost you. I think your mic turned off.
I believe everything is a miracle, and the fact that we could get together from all parts of the world and talk about Torah is a miracle. But as far as the rod, I go back to Psalm 23, where I'm in the valley of the shadow of death, and this rod comforts me. The rod and the staff comfort me. And I'm asking you, how does it comfort you when you're in the valley?
Joel, I love what you just did there. It's a great biblical interpretive technique, right? We have this image of the rod and the staff, and this might not have been your process, but you said, where else do we see this in the Bible? And you found a book in Psalms, a verse in Psalms, right? One that we use a lot, say a lot, and made that connection, right? There, the rod and the staff comfort. It's a different image. I actually thought a lot about part of what I had those pictures of Moses at the beginning. I thought about, we could have done a whole thing about other characters from film who have rods and staffs and what they different look like. But some of the images I conjured up is like, there's the staff that you use to hold over the sea so that it will part. And there's the staff that you lean on to help you walk. especially if you're in a place where, in a place or at a point in your life where it's harder to walk without support. And I think the image from that psalm is about the staff, that you lean on the staff and it provides you comfort and strength because it helps you navigate through troubled times, or shaky times, which, if you've ever sprained an ankle or had knee surgery or just, aren't moving as fast as you used to, I myself have benefited from a modern medical staff of one sort or another, as many others have. And I think it's a different image, right? But the staff can strike and the staff can support. From that support, there's some comfort as well. And I see lots of people have added answers to this as well. I love the diversity in the chat. Thanks, Joel. Ginny.
I know this is pushing the story at this point in time, but because of the fact of the rod overcoming the serpent, are we not looking at the fact that all of the plagues are Hashem's way of overcoming the gods of Egypt?
Ah, nice. Well, that could have been a totally different morning for us. I love that theme. Right, I think, Ginny, what you're asking about is, if we look at the plagues, if we look at this week's Parsha and next week's Parsha, where is there, what symbolism are things that are also represented in the gods of Egypt, and how do each of these moments represent the God of the Bible, the God of the Israelites, showing God's superiority or dominance over these gods? That's definitely a theme. So I guess it's fair critique to say I overlooked it and choosing to look at the staff and a different story about it, but that's a totally fair game as a place to explore in this week's Parsha. What I love about Torah is there's so much more to talk about than any one thing. So Mara, make a note. Maybe Ginny will come back next year and teach about the images from right. Well, if we keep this going, we'll need different themes for different years. And you got mine this week. Maybe Ginny gets a turn, next year. So, all right. Amy. Oh, sorry. I see your hand up and I see your mouth moving, but we can't hear you. You want to unmute? Oh,
There we go.
okay.
You're coming in quite faint, Amy. I'm sorry.
I'm confused about the issue of separating God from nature. Is nature just part of God, and how separate the same?
Sorry,
Alright.
Amy. I think we're having a trouble hearing you. You're welcome to ask your question in the chat.
Right. I think I made it out. Amy, tell me if I
Oh,
got
great.
this. Like the rabbis, right? There's this issue that I raised about separating God from nature, and isn't God part of nature? So I love that you're saying that, especially we just recently celebrated is not exactly the right word, but honored the 50th yahrzeit of Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel, 50 years since his passing. And one of his teachings that was most impactful on me is about noticing God in the world. And one of the places where we notice God a lot is in nature. That's a different, it's a different way of thinking about it. I think for the rabbis in reading the Torah, one question that came up for them, and not just for them, for the, for other theologians as well, the question is God in control of nature, that God could do whatever God wants with nature at any time? Or did God create nature and create the rules of nature, and those rules exist for all of time? And right, and that's an either or, and that's why the miracles in the Torah sometimes are troublesome if you have that either or, right? If there are rules of nature, shouldn't they be inviolate that even God can't change them? Or they're rules of nature, but God can change them if God wants to. That sort of, both of those have an image of God that's sort of above the world and looking down, that says, God created the world, God as creator created the world, made rules of nature, and now we all live by them, even God. Or God created the world, and when God wants to, God can get involved. That's sort of about a transcendent God. Amy, you're giving us a theology that's a little bit more of a immanent God, that says God is part of the fabric of the world, and we find God in nature, and the power of God comes through the power of nature in part. It's a different theological approach, and in some ways, I think a more modern one that, while there are echoes of it in the Bible and the rabbis, it's one we think about a lot more in the modern period that they did then. But I'm glad you called it forward, because in some ways it's closer to my own theology than those other models. All right, we are nearing our final minutes. I really appreciate all these great questions and thoughts, and a really vibrant conversation in the chat. As I said to Ginny, what's great about, the Torah is there's so many things to talk about in each parsha. I really appreciate it. I saw a few comments from people who said, hey, I never thought so much about the staff before. Thanks for, opening up a little bit. That's for me, some of the most fun part of this, when you get to really drill down and say, hey, let's look at this one detail and see how it plays out in a few texts. There are many more texts and many more places we could have explored, but there's only so much you can do in 45 minutes, but we covered a lot. So thanks, Mara, for your help, and I'm gonna turn it back to you.
Thank you all. Wishing you all a Shabbat Shalom, and we will see you here this time next week. Bye-bye.
Take care, everybody. Shabbat Shalom.